can you define what is a tight society versus a loose society, and segue from that into what type of governing system might be best for our current situation? Is democracy compatible with it?
Well, the tight-loose distinction brings in a wonderful colleague named Michelle Gelfand. I'll get to her in a minute. But before then, what's important to grasp is that human cultural diversity is like biological diversity. There's the bushy tree of biological life, and there's the bushy tree of cultural life. There's so many different cultures out there, and that we can understand their diversity in the same way that we understand biological diversity. And when we do that, sometimes we can construct sort of axes, environmental axes. And one of those axes is existential security. Some cultures have a great need for collective action. It might be warfare, it might be disease pandemics, or it might be intensive forms of agriculture. So rice agriculture, for example, calls for much more coordination than wheat farming, for examples. And so cultures that have evolved to be really good at collective action are called tight cultures. And what that means is they have very strong norms, what you should do as a member of that culture, which are enforced. And so if you don't do them, then there are consequences. So that's what a tight culture is. A loose culture is better adapted to a safe and secure environment. There we don't have to do everything in lockstep. We can relax a little bit. We can follow our own drummers. And actually that could be real good because that's innovative. That's experimental and innovative. And so tight and loose cultures exist based on their past, and then that uh, at all scales, by the way. So you could look at this at the national scale. You can shrink down, and you could look at it for the 50 states in the United States. You could look at China. You could compare rice-growing regions of China and wheat-growing regions of uh, of China. And when something like a pandemic hits with COVID, it's a natural experiment. And you can ask, as Michelle Gelfand did, um, how did tight and loose cultures respond? What were the consequences? At this point, tightness was needed by everyone. Everyone needed to coordinate their behavior. But her research shows a, uh, I believe, a sevenfold difference in deaths between loose and tight cultures. And of course, the United States is a loose culture on whole.
I
So the
wonder
United
how
States, but
much
there's not a good track record, of course, as we know, in responding to the pandemic.
I wonder how much being a tight or loose culture correlates with energy surplus. That super wealthy countries that energy is too cheap to meter might naturally default to being more loose. Just a question.
Well, she will tell you. There's quite a lot of variation among rich Western nations. Uh, Germany is a tight culture. Norway is a tight culture. Italy is a loose culture. So there is, and we're ignoring a lot of heterogeneity. If you look within Italy, books such as Robert Putnam's Making Democracy Work, you know that there is a lot of variation within Italy, and also is context dependent. So any culture can be tight in some contexts and loose in others. Airport security is tight no matter what your culture is. When you go through an airport security, you're having a tight moment. So it's um,
So from a cultural perspective, is tight versus loose kind of like multi-level selection, that both are necessary or helpful or relevant at different times and at different scales?
it's not exactly. Tightness and looseness can be adaptive at the group level depending on the circumstances. In loose cultures, perhaps there's more opportunity for cheating and so on. So that maps in a kind of a complicated
So, but the
fashion.
tight society would have more of your uh, what was the acronym that you used? The CDPs, core design principles.
Again, I would want to say that they just implement them in different ways. Um, in loose societies, for example, there's really strong norms for inclusion. You know, if you're a racist in a loose society, watch out. So it's in that sense that I think that and here's where Michelle and I have a high level conversation as to whether you can actually type a society as tight or loose, or whether all societies are sufficiently contextual so that they're tight in some respects and loose in others. What's really needed in all cases, I mean, we have this concept called mismatch that we haven't used the word yet, but basically evolutionary mismatch is when your existing system is adapted to some other environment, but not the present environment. And mismatch can occur for cultures in addition to species. And in today's world, mismatch is everywhere. Mismatch is
Mm.
everywhere. Thanks to the Anthropocene, we've created mismatches for most of the species on Earth. And there's no culture really on Earth that's well adapted to its current uh, environment. We really need to perfect methods of rapid conscious cultural evolution in order to keep up with it. And if we don't, then evolution still takes place, but it results in pathologies and not in solutions.